Hello, everybody. My name is Erin Colburn. I'm the Pre-Health Advising Coordinator for the College of Health Science. I'm going to quickly go around the room and introduce to you your speakers for today's interview preparation workshop. This is our third annual. So in other words, we've done this 3 times. We love this workshop. We think it's hugely beneficial. So if everybody, starting with Kelly, if you could introduce yourself and just kind of maybe which office you work from, and we'll go through everybody else.
Wonderful. Thanks, Erin. Yeah, my name is Kelly Gould. I am a career counselor with Career Services, and I work with health sciences a ton, not as much as Kelsey, but I am here to support all of you in your journey to professional school.
Awesome. Kelsey.
Hello, it's nice to see you all. My name is Kelsey Nelson. I'm the other Kel in Career Services. I'm an embedded career specialist, and how that differs a little bit from what Kelly does is I'm more specialized. I work specifically with College of Health Sciences students, working to get career development into the classroom. So thanks for having me today.
Shannon.
Hey, thank you. My name is Shannon Kerr. I am an academic advisor in the College of Health Studies. I work primarily with freshmen, sophomores, and juniors.
Awesome. And then Kaya is our guest speaker today.
Hi, I'm Kaya Lozda. I'm with Kobe Career Services. I'm also just a grad student. I'm in the MBA program, so I've been through this process and I understand it's kind of a struggle sometimes, so hope it's helpful here.
All right. So I'm going to give that time to Kelly and Kelsey, and then pop in when it's my turn. So take it away.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you again for joining us today. Like Erin mentioned, this is the third time that we're doing this workshop, which is really exciting. Lots of students have found this helpful. And so we hope that today, this is something that you also find helpful as you get ready to interview, whether it be for professional schools or other opportunities. Today, we're going to be covering a lot of different things. We're going to be discussing different strategies to prepare for interviews. We're going to be learning about a great resource on campus here shortly, the Kobe Career Closet. We're going to also talk about what types of questions to expect for interviews, because you'll never know exactly what they're going to ask you. However, we can talk about the different types of questions that you could come across. We're also going to have some practice breaking down answers to questions, as well as best practices for what happens after an interview. Okay, this is where the disclaimer comes in. There are 1,000 ways to work on your career development, whether it be from resumes to interviews to cover letters, anything like that. Particularly with interviews, today we are focusing on what I like to call a 20,000 foot view. This is meant to go over a lot of breadth to different ways to prepare for interviews and how to execute an interview. And I wanted to throw out a little disclaimer that if there isn't something that you quite latch onto today, or if you still have questions after this, that is totally okay. And we invite you to talk to us. That's what we're here for. This presentation is meant to cover a lot of different aspects of interviewing. And if you ever have questions that are more specific to you and your interviewing preparation, please, we would love for you to reach out so we can support you. Okay, so now that we have kind of gone over what we're going to be discussing today, we're going to talk a bit about preparation. And to begin, that means dressing the part. How do you prepare with the attire that you have for your interview? And this is where I'm actually going to pass off to our guest, Kaya, today. Kaya, take it away, please.
Awesome. Yeah, so thanks for letting me be here today to talk about the Kobe Career Closet. It's actually a really cool resource, and I think a lot of universities have something similar to this. But a lot of the models that we see are people who can come in and kind of borrow some professional clothing. And what's really cool about our model is that you can actually come and take some clothes, find, see what you like, and then you get to keep those pieces. So whatever you grab, it's yours. You can grab about 4 pieces a semester. And so we really want to make sure that everyone has access to professional clothing. This is just kind of like a picture of our closet currently. We try to make it homey. So, you can book about an hour in there, come take your time, kind of go through everything, see what you like. And then we have a private room for you to try stuff on and kind of see what fits, see what works for you. Yeah, and so just kind of get into the details a little bit. We are in Kobe, but just because we're in Kobe, it's a resource for all students. So don't let that deter you. You should make an appointment though, ideally to come use the closet. Like I said, you could have between like 45 minutes, an hour, kind of whatever you need to shop the closet. So it is pretty fun. Like I said, you can get 4 items. We're flexible though. I know sometimes students have various interviews. Maybe they have like stages of interviews. And in that case, you don't want to be wearing the same outfit every time. And so if you need more items, that's totally fine. Just let us know. We do complete like a quick survey when you check in. So just be ready for that. It takes about 3 minutes, so it's very quick. And so if you're wondering where we're at, we're in the Micron Business and Economics building, MBEB, room 1120. And so if you've never been to the MBEB, we're right on the bottom floor. If you kind of like walk in the middle of the building, I'm assuming from the Ingalls students usually come in, I'd say we're left. But we have a lot of signage, so I wouldn't worry too much. And if you make an appointment online, we'll send you all the instructions, so don't worry. If this is something you're interested in, and I would absolutely encourage everyone to take advantage of it, you can email kobecareers@boisestate.edu with questions and to schedule a time to visit. Honestly, we also have a way to schedule an appointment online. We have like an online form, and I could read out the whole URL for you, but if you just Google Boise State Career Closet, it's going to come up. So that's probably a better way for you to remember how to get to it. And we're open Monday through Thursday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I would say the one challenging thing right now is I know people kind of get stressed right before interviews. You start kind of preparing last minute, which I totally get, but do try to make an appointment with at least 1 day's notice so that we can make sure we have a time for you that day. So if you could let us know ahead of time, that would be really helpful. But really, I just want to say, like, this is a great resource. We have a lot of really nice clothes in there. So don't feel like, if you don't have professional clothes, you won't be ready, because you can absolutely come get some and take your time. And it's a really stress-free, chill environment. So we really want to make sure everyone feels like they can come use the resource, and it's not a stressful place to go or anything like that. That's about all I have. Do you have any questions? Anything else you want me to cover or anything like that?
Let's give just a second in case anyone has questions in the chat or anything.
And I'll say too, just we have a ton of pants, suits, jackets, shirts, dresses, sweaters, pretty much everything. And we also have a steamer, lint roller, all that kind of stuff. So even if you just need to get your dress steamed, you can still come by and we can help you with that.
That's an awesome resource. I don't see anyone else coming in on the chat. However, you all will have access to these slides. And so please, here's the contact information. Please don't hesitate to use this resource. It's a great tool. And like it was mentioned, sometimes interviewing can be kind of stressful to prepare for. And so this can be a way to take one of those stressors off your list. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem.
Wonderful. So a little bit more on dressing the part. Generally what I recommend is erring on the side of caution with your attire. So thinking about hair, makeup, jewelry, accessories that tend to fit any type of potential work environment or interview environment. Definitely think comfortable professional shoes. And like I said, err on the side of caution. And try to get this coordinated, and any alterations, seeing any of that in advance, just like we have with the career closet. Remove all your tags. And I want you to think about, can you sit in your outfit? Can you walk in the outfit? Can you comfortably stand in that outfit? Sometimes these interviews can last all day. If you're walking around campus, or you're like a university campus, or you're going to a different work setting, like you could easily walk around or be sitting for a long time. So you want to make sure that you are comfortable, whether you're sitting, standing, anything like that. If you are traveling for this interview, how are you going to be prepared when you travel with this? So for example, do you need a steamer with you? Do you need a lint roller? Do you need a garment bag? All of these things you're going to want to kind of think about so you're not stressed the day of. Now that you know a little bit about dressing the part, let's talk about the different types of interviews to expect. These will most likely be conveyed to you getting ready as you get ready for the email, or excuse me, for the interview. They will probably send you an itinerary or give you at least some insight to what to expect. Generally, they fall in the categories of one-on-one, so you with another person, you with a panel or a committee, potentially a group interview, or with you're with other applicants, potentially a lunch interview. We also have a performance interview where you're asked to complete a certain task. There's also a multiple mini interview, MMI, which is that event that is coming up here on April 5th, and any combination of the above. So you could potentially be put in any of those settings for your interview.
This is me? Okay, perfect. So diving into the MMI, which as Kelsey mentioned, and third plug of the day, April 5th, be there. It's a lot of fun, even though it's on Zoom, it's still fun. But the MMI usually involves multiple stations or rooms that you kind of rotate between. So you're given 2 minutes to read a scenario, and it can be anything from you get an actor in front of you, or it's an ethical dilemma. It can be anything. And you get 5 to 8 minutes to execute that within that room that you're going into. So how you're evaluated on these might not be so obvious. They might be super obvious. They might be not obvious. But what you really want to think about when it comes to these questions and these scenarios are, how are you going to answer this question? How do you emotionally react to any interviewer's questions, or an actor, for example? And how do you consider multiple possible answers or perspectives? You have a lot of time, but it's not going to feel like a lot of time. So how can you make sure that you're getting your perspective and your ideas and thought processes across? And how do you respond to opinions that you might disagree with? Because that might happen occasionally in life. So how you respond to those situations are going to maybe be evaluated within these MMIs. And make sure that you do your research. So know the program that you're interviewing for, know what questions to possibly anticipate. And we'll talk a little bit more about resources that you can find those a little bit later on. But look at the resources that you already know you have. So we have the AAMC, which is the American Association of Medical Colleges. They have a list of core competencies for providers and for physicians. And then there's the NACE core competencies, which is, as a career counselor, this is our division. So this is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. They have a list of 8 competencies that can be really, really helpful to emphasize as you're going through the interview process. And then of course you have YouTube, you have Reddit, you have your forums.studentdoctor.net, which you want to take with a grain of salt. Some of these, people love to talk about what they hate and they love to talk about what they love. And YouTube, Reddit, forums, any other kind of blogs that you can find, they're all perfect examples of that. So keep that in mind. Somebody who might not have the best experience at their interview might be a little bit more harsh online than they would be otherwise. So really make sure that you are getting multiple perspectives and use that critical thinking as you're learning throughout your college courses to do your research. Okay, and then make a cheat sheet. So this can be anywhere from like just an index card to a huge notebook piece of paper. So make a cheat sheet before your interview to review immediately before. So these are things that you really want to remember as you're going through the interview process. So this can include what specifically excites you about that program. So be specific. Don't be general, like, oh, they have great scores, everybody gets a job afterwards. Like, yeah, that's good information, but why? Like, why do they get a job afterwards? What are you learning in that program that makes you so employable? And what are some of your strengths with examples? Don't forget your stories and your examples, because that's really going to be where they can see exactly what you can do. And then what are some of your weaknesses, and include how you're improving them, because everyone has weaknesses. It's how we deal with them that really matters. So really keep that in mind as you're making your cheat sheet. And then have an outline for tell me about yourself. Oh, this is my favorite, because every student that I've ever spoken to about interviews is always like, I hate tell me about yourself, that question the most, because it's so hard for me to talk about myself. But just remember that this is an objective view, like you are keeping this very factual, and these are things that you've done. And so really make sure that you own that, like you've actually done it. That wasn't just like a ghost of yourself going off and job shadowing somebody. This was actually you. So really keep that in mind as you're thinking about tell me about yourself. And we'll talk more about this later, so I'm not gonna cover it too much right now. But review any application materials like your personal statement, your resume, any supplemental documents that you had to submit, and make sure you have what you talked about kind of in your head, fresh in your mind. And why did you want to pursue whatever field you're going into, dentistry, physicians, things like that, as opposed to any other healthcare field? And that's the key point right there, is as opposed to any other healthcare field. Really make sure you differentiate that. And then anything else that can help you prepare for that specific interview. So writing down questions that you might have for them, things like that. Okay, and then of course you want to practice. You don't just want to go into it head first, though you can, and many people do, but it's not recommended. But really make sure that you're practicing, whether it be with your friends, your family. But we really recommend, of course, coming into our offices. So make an appointment or multiple appointments with career services, because we are pros at that kind of stuff. We do interviews probably almost every day for mock interviews. So come on into us. We're happy to help. We also have drop-ins Monday through Thursday from 2 to 4 that are virtual. So feel free to pop in, even if you can only do it for like 5 minutes. I literally had a student today who has an interview for a graduate assistantship who's like, I only have 4 minutes, I have to work. And she just dropped on in and was like, all right, let's talk about interviewing. And then of course yourself, like practice in front of a mirror. I will also recommend like recording yourself on your computer. I know it's awkward, I know it's weird, but the first time you do, it's going to be the hardest. And then after that, it gets a lot easier. But just record yourself answering, tell me about yourself, and see how long you're talking for, see what you want to include, all that good stuff. And you're not going to know every question that they're going to ask you, but you can practice particular categories and articulating your skills and abilities and using those tools to build your answers. And then of course your peers. So we have the MMI event coming up, fourth plug, and we really recommend coming to that because it can be really helpful. Even if you're not doing if you know you're not going to be doing an MMI for an interview or something like that, it's still really helpful to challenge you a little bit and really make sure that you're staying on track interviewing wise. Okay, Kelsey.
Yes, let's do this. You've prepared, you know how you're dressing, you have understood what type of question what questions you could get. Like, let's dive in. What actually happens at the interview? First off, some general tips. I think one back. There we go. Sorry. There you go. No, you're good. Sorry. My screen was just a tad delayed. Sorry, folks. Anyway, be nice to everybody. Be nice in general. So that's just your life lesson for the day. But specifically with interviewing, you never know kind of who's going to report back to the committee or who's on the committee for that matter. Sometimes with interviews, you may be having a lunch with a current student in the program. They could be providing feedback to the committee. Even the person who like greets you at the front desk. So someone in that type of role, like they could be reporting back. The person who is emailing you to coordinate this interview, all of these people, it is imperative that you're kind to them. Make sure to be prompt. That's another big one. If you have to show up at 9 a.m., don't show up at 9 a.m. Show up a few minutes before. I generally recommend at least 10 minutes as a safety, but make sure to be prompt. The other thing is that it's really important to know where your interview is in location to where you're at, either the day before, if you're like, for example, traveling overnight. Where is the place you're interviewing? Where's that location compared to the hotel you're staying at? A good example of this is thinking about, I don't know, Health Sciences Riverside in comparison to the sub at Boise State. They're all technically, Boise State campus. However, it's a walk, right? So you have to make sure that you understand where you are relative to where the interview location is. If you're driving, where are you going to be parking? How long does it take for you to park and then walk to the location? All of those things, it's important to know and know how long it's going to take you to get there. I suggest mapping this out the day before. At least, and if you can map it out with traffic time. I know that a lot of like maps features on phones can predict potentially like how long it takes to get there with driving and traffic and all that jazz the next day. Do your research on that. Plain and simple. Also expect the unexpected, be flexible. You never know if things could get shifted that day. Maybe someone on your committee is sick and someone else is replacing them, or maybe the interview before you is running long, so they have you doing something else first and then coming back. Be flexible, be prepared, and kind of be ready for some shifts to happen just in case. Like I mentioned, take your student interviewers seriously. Anticipate any things on your application that could concern the interviewer as well. So if you have something on your application, such as poor grades that you want to discuss or anything like that, just be ready to have them ask you that, because anything on your application is fair game for them to bring up. Yes, they will have standard questions that they will be asking. However, you never know what they're going to pull from your application. The other thing is to take any interviewing necessities in a bag, in a carry-on bag if you're flying, just in case they lose your luggage. You want to make sure that everything you have is ready with you, so you can still successfully complete that interview and not be as stressed about your lost luggage. Virtual interviewing. This is something that we have added on to this presentation the last few years, especially just because it is something that is becoming more and more prominent, and there are many programs that do use this. Many companies that use virtual interviewing as well. So this is one of those aspects where it's important to prepare in advance, right? Make sure you know if a virtual interview is going to be a component. I do recommend, if possible, practicing using the platform in advance. So what is the platform you're going to be using? If they send you information about that platform, most likely, I would venture to guess it's going to have information about what type of maybe computer update you need, or what type of browser you're going to be needing to use, or potentially even a link to test out your browser settings, your microphone, your camera, all that jazz. Do that in advance. Also look at the window screen. What's in your background that could be distracting for the person on the other end. You may not be able to blur your background like I have right now. So it's important to make sure that you have a very plain background as much as you can. Another aspect is to look at the camera, not at your screen while you're interviewing. Something that I like to recommend is people like cutting out a little piece of paper and putting like a smiley face on it, and then putting it right up next to the camera, so they know to look at the camera as opposed to look at themselves. Another one is pick a quiet space. So if you have roommates, let them know that you need that time. If you have a pet or a dog, ask if maybe one of your friends could take them for a doggy play date, something to minimize any noises. Another one is to turn off phone and computer notifications. That's a big one. For those of you that have Macs, and those very convenient notifications that pop up for like your messaging or anything, make sure those are turned off, because you don't want that noise popping up and then having that come in the interview. Make sure to still wear appropriate attire. Although yes, there is a benefit where they're only going to see you from here up. Don't just wear your pajamas. Like, still get in the zone with it. But again, still be comfortable. You're not going to have to worry about shoes, thankfully, but you still want to be comfortable, but also feeling prepared and ready to go. Check the time zone is a big one. Where is the interview? Where's the school located? So is it an East Coast school? What time do they give you? Do they give you an Eastern Standard Time compared to where you're going? So make sure to be cognizant of that. When you're testing out the equipment, ask yourself, you need a microphone. That's another big one. So can they hear you with or without a microphone? And then I'm going to ask Erin to chime in on this one. Are the interviews live or pre-recorded?
Right. So ultimately with virtual interviewing, what we're finding is there's actually quite a bit of opportunity for schools and programs to interview. And what we're going to see is we're still going to see a lot of schools opt for virtual interview opportunities. Many of the schools have reached out to some of the students and they might continue to do virtual interview, or they might choose to do in-person and virtual. But there's a lot of different platforms and different things that they're doing. One of the options is they're actually doing recorded interviews where you won't actually have a live person you're interacting with. You'll be given a list of questions, and then you'll go on and you'll record yourself responding to those questions. So you won't have another person to talk to, and that could feel really awkward, right? Like you're sitting there interviewing and answering those questions. Medical schools have opted for some of this. And some schools will even do all of them. So they might do an MMI as a virtual, they might do an one-on-one as a virtual, they might do the recorded option as a virtual, they might do a situational as a virtual. So keeping that in mind, you want to think about, you really want to know what type of format is being built. The other thing I would add too is that some of you may, be able to squirrel away the whole idea of using your tablet or your phone for Zoom sessions during class. But we actually at the campus have, you can rent out the cameras and the microphones for free through the zone. And so I would strongly recommend that you have an actual video camera. Don't go out and necessarily buy one, but rent one for free and make sure that you have it set up so that way your battery dies on your phone or your tablet and you actually have that visual, because this is a chance for you to get to interact with them one-on-one and in person. So but it could be a recorded one where you don't have a live person, or it could be a live person you're interacting with, or a series of live people. So in other words, like a panel of individuals like we have here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. If you're doing your interview in person, or let's be honest, even if it is virtual, it's important to think about, okay, what do you need that day to get through the day? What do you need? If it's virtual, for example, having water nearby, those types of things. Now, if you're in person, and arguably this first one, especially, you can have it virtually as well. Bringing a pad folio with a pen and paper. Does anyone want to unmute themselves or type in the chat why it's important to bring a pen and paper to an interview? Any guesses? Write down what you're going to say. Okay.
To take notes about how to answer your questions.
Yes. Questions. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you all for engaging. Really appreciate it. For the first comment, write down what you're going to say. I think in terms of a brainstorming exercise, that yes, having pen and paper is great. Even the day of, thinking of the cheat sheet that Kelly talked about, something to hype yourself up with. I only caution that just because you don't want to be reading off of that in an interview. And I think you might be surprised at how they can tell that in a virtual interview as well. So I'd be cautious with that. However, I do like what you're thinking. It's because that's a really good strategy to help you remember all these things that you do want to share with them. But yes, for notes, that can be really important. You can bring those things up later in questions, right? If you have a great conversation with a student interviewer at lunch, for example, and at the end of the day, you have a chance to ask questions, you can follow up with that. It's also important for getting names of who you interacted with, and we will talk about that later. I also encourage, in addition to the cheat sheet, a copy of your application or your resume at minimum for the personal review, right? If you have a few minutes in between in between interviews, or it's right before the interview and you're walking over and you just want something to review, it can be incredibly helpful. Also water, very important, stay hydrated, friends. Mints, granola bar, masks, could put this on there, tissues, deodorant. You don't need to have like Mary Poppins bag of everything, right? Like but just think about what do you need in that interview, and have that with you so you can get through the day feeling your best. Okay, we've talked a ton about preparing. Let's talk about the actual questions now. Some general strategies going in, and we're going to discuss some questions in detail. Okay, it's important to think about what is the question really asking, because sometimes what they're really asking can be asked in multiple ways. Don't get too caught up in this to the point where maybe you get a little flustered. That's happened to me before, but think about if they are asking you, for example, tell me about a time you failed. They're not asking to shame you. When you leave the interview, they're not going to laugh at you for failing. They want to know what's a situation where you felt like you failed and how did you overcome it. So when you think of a question, think about, why are they asking me this? And then you can kind of use that to focus your answer on. Keep your answers relevant, please and thank you. Elaborate, right? If they ask you, what is your top quality as a healthcare professional? And you say, I communicate. Doesn't really give them much to work on. So make sure to elaborate. Tell them why you feel that way, how you've demonstrated that type of thing. This ties directly into giving examples to support what you say. Keep your answers with a positive tone. And then we'll talk about using the STAR interviewing technique for some of those behavioral questions, those tell me about a time questions. Okay. We need to know, Kelly and I need to know here, what questions do you hope that you never get asked in an interview or you're afraid to ask? You can either unmute yourself or you can type in the chat, because everyone has them. And if you didn't, I mean, kudos to you. Oh my gosh, those questions. Yes, those ones can be tough. Sometimes people call them icebreakers, and I don't know why, because they never do that for me. They never have that effect for me.
They form the ice.
They form the ice, they reinforce it. That's a great point. Thank you. Weaknesses and
strengths.
That's definitely, that's a good one to have on that cheat sheet that Kelly talked about earlier. Think about that in advance, right? Especially the weakness one. We pack that stuff away in our head. It's not as easy to have that at the ready, because if you were to ask me that in this moment, I would definitely have to take some time to ponder that. So
I think it's harder for us to remember our strengths than our weaknesses. I think our weaknesses we're like, yeah, I'm really terrible at, but
yeah, that's true. Definitely. Any other ones? What about the tell me about a time questions? Anyone?
Tell about ourselves.
Oh yeah, tell me about yourself. Someone messaged me, tell me about a time you failed. All of these are great. And the fact that these are questions that you all have means that it's something to definitely consider diving into. And we're going to talk about a lot of these today. However, it is important to make sure that you practice these, right? If it is something that is a little uncomfortable, be ready to discuss it, because they could very well be things, even though they may not ask you directly, what do you consider your greatest strength? They are probably going to inquire about something that would have the same answer, right? So it's important to think about these things as you prepare. Types of interview questions generally fall into one of these categories. First one's going to be questions about you, right? Your qualifications. Tell me about yourself falls into this category. If they look at your application and they say, oh, wow, you volunteered 500 hours here. Tell me more about that experience for you. That's that question. Behavioral. The tell me about a time questions. Tell me about a time you worked on a team. Tell me about a time you had a difficult patient. Tell me about a time that you accomplished something. All of these fall into that category. We also have scenario questions of, you are given a hypothetical situation, what would you do? Stress questions. So you're asked to complete a task. And then role play, where you are put in a room with an actor, and you are going to respond to the actor in a given situation. Okay, we've hit this one several times in discussion, so it was, we're bound to talk about it today. Tell me about yourself. This one, again, is a great one to prepare in advance because you can think about the programs that you're applying to and maybe tailor your answer a little bit to that specific program. When they're asked this, you have to remember, what are they really asking? And when it comes down to it, generally they're saying, hey, I've looked at a lot of applications. Can you remind me of who you are, why you're here, and what you bring to the table? It's kind of a way to bridge that gap between the in-person interaction and what they see on paper, because they've only, and although your application is pretty comprehensive, that's you written out, right? And the interview is where they get to see more of that come into play. And this question kind of can help bridge that. When you are thinking about preparing this question, it can help to create a structure or a body for your information. So the way that I like to think about it is, if you're going into an interview, maybe write bullet points of what are the main things that you want to hit and not tell me about yourself. And those could be things that, brought you into medicine. Those could be experiences you've had, right? Things to help convey a bit more about who you are. This overview of qualifications or your interest in medicine could be conveyed through discussing your education, related experience, skills. And up to this point, you've already reflected a lot on your applications, particularly in your personal statement. So for this type of question, especially, you can review your personal statement, kind of think about, okay, what did I hit on this? What are the themes that are drawn there, and potentially incorporate that into your tell me about yourself. When it comes down to, though, thinking about why have you chosen this career? Where does this interest come from? And give it kind of like a 20,000 foot view of that. Okay, friends. This is where we are actually going to put you into breakout rooms. And we would like you to, first, we're going to ask you to do 3 to 4 minutes of brainstorming. So I want you to get out a piece of paper or document to write on what you would incorporate into your tell me about yourself. So that's the first thing. We're going to set a timer, and we would like you to start by brainstorming how you could potentially answer this tell me about yourself. This isn't like a pop quiz or anything like that. You won't be asked to immediately respond or anything. However, we want you to brainstorm different options for this, and then we're going to put you into some breakout rooms for discussion with a partner. Kelly, Erin, Shannon, anything else to add?
Nope, I'm going to pause the recording so that you can do the 3 minutes, and then I'll open the breakout rooms, and I've already set those so that you'll have a partner. We gave you a chance to practice, right? To like formulate an answer to a question that you will likely have, and then be able to orchestrate that. How did that feel? Positive, negative?
It felt good.
Kind of nice to practice, right? Like in a non-scary place. All right. Moving forward, I think it's Kelly.
Thank you. Okay. So moving on, another complicated one that we hear a lot about is, what is your greatest weakness? So some strategies for this one is to give an honest assessment of what you think is going to be the most challenging thing for you to do in medical school. So, or as a healthcare professional, whatever professional school you end up going into. And it could be a big one that I hear about a lot is time management, not being able to say no to things, all that good stuff. So those are ones I hear a lot, but there can be really good ways to either use that to your advantage or to use a lot of different skills to mitigate and manage those weaknesses. And then finish with what steps you might take to improve on this weakness and what strategies you might use. So for example, for me, I put things off to the very, very last minute, probably like day of. And so sometimes I either have to use it to my advantage and say like, hey, like this is something that I use to my advantage because I work the best under pressure. Or I have to say something like, I have to set deadlines for myself that I need to be very strict about in order to get things done before the day of. So I'm not stressing about it, 5 minutes before midnight on a Friday. And then the way that you can say this is, rather than saying, a weakness of mine is, you can kind of reframe it to say an area of improvement or a challenge area, things like that, like reframing it so it's something that is a challenge, but it's not a challenge that you can't overcome. Okay, and then another category that we have is behavioral. So this is usually the question where they say, describe a time when, or tell me about a time when you had to deal with the conflict, things like that. And these are questions that ask you to tell a story or to give a specific example. So really make sure that you're thinking back within your experiences that you've had. And a strategy for this is following STAR. So I can't see the chat right now, but if you've seen STAR, you can just give like a thumbs up or whatever. If you've heard of it, because that's awesome. You have a great background for it. But if you haven't, that's okay too. It stands for situation, task, action, and result. So for situation, you're giving a brief background for the context. Doesn't have to be like a super long story, just kind of giving enough context for if they weren't there, if they weren't there, they definitely were not there, hopefully. But if they weren't there, they'll be able to get a good view of what it is that you're talking about. And then setting up the task or the problem. So what was it that you were dealing with? What was the situation? And then action. So what did you do? This is really where you want to have the bulk of your answer. What did you do in order to solve this problem or navigate this situation? And then what was the result? So what was the outcome of it? And if it wasn't successful, what did you learn from that situation? And some examples of questions that might pop up. Tell me about a time you failed. Woohoo, the question of the day, it seems. Give me an example of a time that you dealt with a difficult customer or a difficult patient. Tell me about a time that you made a mistake. And then what do you do to stay organized, which is a big one that comes to professional school. Okay, and then scenario questions. So these are those questions that they might pose, like an ethical dilemma or something that, like a situation that might pop up with a patient that you have to kind of think through. So anticipate different situations that could occur in medical school or in healthcare. How would you handle these situations? And you can even think of situations that you saw when you were job shadowing or when you were a CNA at St. Luke's or something like that. Think about the situations that you've gone through, whether it was like an ethical thing, like an ethical dilemma that you witnessed, a difficult patient, telling somebody some bad news, things like that. And think about how you would handle those situations. And Google is your friend, so research how professionals in medicine handle these different situations. And that's where those Reddit posts, those YouTube videos, those forums, as well as other different websites that you might know of, how they would navigate these different situations. And if you are still in contact with like a person that you job shadowed or something like that, they might also be good resources for that, as they might be the ones that have either gone through those situations or have researched what to do in those situations. And think back to any situations that you've seen with any clinical experiences that you might have. And I just mentioned that, so that's great. Okay. And when it comes to these scenario questions, try to apply the 4 pillars of medical ethics. And these are something that if you are going into anywhere in healthcare, are helpful to know. So we have autonomy. And so we want to show respect for the patient and pay attention to their right to make their own decisions, to make their healthcare decisions. And we want to focus on non-maleficence. So does this harm the patient? Justice, what are the consequences of this in the wider community? And beneficence, so how does this benefit the patient? And I think next we're going to practice this a little bit, not right now, but in a little bit. So some examples of some questions that might come up. For example, a 13-year-old patient reveals to you that they are sexually active and that their parents don't know. What do you do as a physician in this situation? Another one. A patient in the emergency room says they want to leave against medical advice. What do you do? So these are some thinkers. Like those scenario questions are going to get your brain gears turning. So really in this situation, take your time, like think through this. They don't need a right or wrong answer, or they're not thinking of a right or wrong answer. They just want to see your thought process within this. So some tips, synthesize the scenario because it's a lot of information to take in. Keep bullet points in your head about what is the key information. Like for this one, we have a lot of information in here, but some of the key phrases within here: 13-year-old patient, sexually active, parents don't know. What do you do? So really keep track of the core information within some of these scenario questions. And then clarify the context. If you're not necessarily sure, like exactly what they said, like feel free to clarify that. And really make sure that you're focusing on any ethical tension or context and talk through it, because that's what they're looking for here, is that thought process. What are some of the ethical dilemmas within this? What are some bullet points that you want to talk about within some of these scenarios? And then show empathy. Empathy is a huge part of patient care, and you really want to make sure that that is coming across however you respond to this question. Then that kind of goes back to maybe even if you don't agree with what is going on, being empathetic to the situation and to that person and to that patient. Focus on building trust. So what would you do to build trust with that patient or whoever is in the person in this scenario? And then identify the knowns and identify the unknowns and talk it through. They're not going to be able to read your mind and on what you're thinking within these scenario questions. So talk it out. That's what this is for. And then don't focus on showing off your knowledge. You might not have knowledge on this, and that's okay. You don't have to pretend that you do. That's what professional school, medical school is for, is to teach you how to respond to some of these situations. So if you don't know, it's okay to say, I'm not 100% sure on this, but this is how I would approach this question as of now. And I'm hoping to learn more about this in the future. And then, like I said, understand that there's no right answer. Give the committee insight into what factors that you identify to come to your own conclusion. And it might be that there is no conclusion, but as long as they can see your thought process within that scenario question, I think you did a good job. And then remember that the patient will always come first. So that's where that empathy and that trust comes in. Okay, so here's a quick activity. We're going to talk about this one. So I'm excited to hear your responses to this. So I'll just repeat it again, but a 13-year-old patient reveals to you that they are sexually active and that their parents do not know. What would you do as a physician in this situation? So think about the 4 pillars. Are we doing breakout rooms for this one, or are we just doing large?
Yes. So we're going to put you in 2 breakout rooms, and you'll have a facilitator to help you go through these. And then Shannon, I accidentally put you in a breakout room. Don't go in because I need you to stay out. So, so let me open the breakout rooms, and then Kelly, you're in one room, and Kelsey, you're in the other.
Okay.
You all brought really great points in that discussion there. So if those are ever things that you want to continue to discuss, please come chat with us. We're happy to support you as you talk these things out, because we could probably spend 15-20 minutes talking about those different scenarios.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. So yeah, feel free to come and see us, because there's a lot. Okay, so another type of question that you'll potentially see are role play questions. So these are when you have to interact with an actor posed as a friend or a patient or some other rando in these scenarios. So the way that you can approach this is compassion, empathy, building trust, all those things that we've already kind of talked about. Professionalism and proper conduct. Making sure if it's like a scenario where they're coming at you like either crying or really upset, making sure you're taking that deep breath, getting your composure. Like these acting questions are going to be really weird for you at first, because it's like, who are these people? Like, what is happening to me? I didn't sign up for this. This is supposed to be an interview, but this might happen. And in the MMI, I think this is my 5th plug for the MMI today. But we actually sometimes have a role-playing rotation. And a couple of years ago, one of our coworkers, she was able to cry on cue. So they might be able to do that. And so you might be actually dealing with somebody who is crying, visibly upset. And so the way that you approach that, you're going to have to kind of retain some composure a little bit, for sure. So professionalism, proper conduct, pay attention to how you're communicating. If you find yourself getting frustrated, like try and tap that down a little bit so you can kind of approach it in a professional way. Showing empathy, of course. And then you can always keep ICE in mind. So ideas, concerns, and expectations. So for your ideas, does your patient or does your friend or whomever having ideas about what's going on, about the situation or condition? Their concerns. So what is worrying them? What's the problem? And then their expectations. So what does the patient or the person hope to get out of your discussion or scenario? And so there are 3 general situations that might pop up, and there can be things outside of this as well. So keep that in mind, but these are the 3 that are likely to come up just because they test a lot of the things that they want, a lot of those competencies that they want you to have. And so we have breaking bad news. So that's informing a patient of their recent cancer diagnosis. For example, explaining a concept like how does a vaccine work? And then you have to explain it to a 5-year-old. And then you have to explain it to a 55-year-old, which might happen more than you think it does, especially nowadays. And then gathering information or comforting somebody. So taking a history from a patient who just had a traumatic event at a clinic. So for example, you have pulled out of your driveway and backed into your neighbor's brand new BMW. You walk up to their door to tell them. So if this is a role play scenario, you have an actor in front of you. He's screaming, yelling about his brand new BMW. What do you do? So be prepared to potentially encounter these types of questions. Okay, so we have one more activity here. So I think we're doing just a large group for this one.
Well, and I'm looking at the time. I don't think we have enough time to do the individual breakouts, but yeah, let's spend a couple minutes just talking about this question, if that works for you, Kelly.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I'll read it out loud here. You're a 2nd year medical student preparing for your end of year examinations. 1 week before your examinations, you have a molecules, cells, and diseases assignment due. One of your friends has just emailed copies of coursework completed by students in prior years for the same project. Explain your actions in this scenario. Okay, so what are some things that we're thinking about here?
Well,
oh, go ahead. Sorry, Cooper.
I was going to say, personally, if you're looking at other people's work to just kind of like get by, especially with the assignment, you're not formulating your own ideas and you're not learning. And that can come back and bite you in the end, because obviously this course is on at least cells and diseases. So there's some form of medical relatance in there. And what if you come across that exact scenario or problem that they're giving in that worksheet, and hey, I just copied so-and-so's worksheet. I didn't really learn that topic. Now you're at a disadvantage in the real world.
Yep, exactly. Like you're thinking about the consequences, not only for, academic consequences for like cheating, but you're also thinking about your own learning and what what you're getting from this class. Absolutely. And some other things to think about are like, number one, what are the
I
consequences?
guess one perspective. Oh, sorry.
Nope, go for it.
One perspective that I think about it from not a cheating perspective is this is a project. It's not like an assignment. So I think of it as kind of like, well, why can't you use somebody else's project as like a template or an example of how you do your project? Not meaning they have to be the same thing, but using somebody else's work as kind of like a guide or a reference to make sure that you're doing the right thing and following all the guidelines is really helpful. And I feel like that's not cheating, that's just using your resources wisely, as long as you don't use, their information. I kind of see it from a perspective of like collaborating with others is definitely a skill that you're going to need in the medical field. So looking at other people's work is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, totally. Sometimes it can give that framework of what exactly to do, or, making sure you're doing it in the way that the professor potentially wants it to be done. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great perspective to bring in.
Well, and splitting hairs on this, the question does say coursework versus projects, which could have different, to your points, Cassidy, some different implications. And so especially in that one, I would encourage to like maybe inquire more about like project versus coursework and kind of what those implications are. It does kind of leave some ambiguity there, I admit. Okay, wonderful. But yeah, y'all are thinking in the right direction. I think you're thinking of all the perspectives. And then of course, one thing that I'll leave you with this question is, if it's something that you're not going to do, if you're not going to use it as that framework, how do you approach your friend that emailed that to you? So thinking about that perspective as well as you're going forward. Yeah, wonderful points. Okay, Kelsey, go for it. Hey, that's me. Okay, we're gonna dive in really quickly to, okay, you've done the interview, you've celebrated, maybe you've treated yourself to a no-bake cookie from Flying M, right? Like you're all done, you're wrapped up, awesome. Now what do? It's not over, friends. First things first, thank you note. It's so important, although a thank you note is not going to be necessarily a make or break to you getting into that program or getting that job. It is kind of the last step to demonstrate your gratitude. It guarantees that the last interaction you have is one expressing gratitude and one that is positive, which I think is always a good thing to do. Who do you send it to? This one is a little bit more tough and is definitely in the eye of the beholder. It always depends on where you're at and what the interview is like and all that jazz. So you have to kind of assess that to yourself. So think about, who did you have a meaningful conversation with? So if you're having lunch with a student, maybe one to them. Maybe if there was one person from a panel that you want to write to and then ask them to express gratitude with the rest of the panel, naming everyone else individually. Is there a representative on behalf of a department? Who coordinated your interview? Who is the one that sent you the emails? Who was the one that answered your questions? All of those things. So you have to kind of think about what was most meaningful to you and then decide who to send thank you cards to. When do you send it? Ideally within 24 hours. Email or handwritten, choose the best for your circumstances. So what I mean by that is, if it is, for example, a virtual interview and you handwrite a card, it could take a few days to get there. I generally recommend email correspondence in that regard. I think that this is something that has changed a little bit in the expectations since we first did this workshop. Erin, would you mind speaking about Postable really quick? If I got the name right on that.
So she's actually driving.
Oh, okay.
So I can talk about Postable.
Shannon's got us.
Yeah. So what Postable is just an online service. You can get on there. You can look at, they have tons of different cards. You would, pick your fonts, pick the pictures, and then they'll send it out for you for a minimal fee. That's how I send Christmas cards now. It's a great idea.
I'm actually going to put it in the chat right now if anyone wants to look. This is not required by any means to use Postable, but if you want to, you totally can, like throwing it out as an option. But I think you'd be surprised how well an email can go and like how far that can go. I had one student actually who was interviewing in Iowa, and her interview got done at 4 p.m. and she was leaving the next day at like 10. So she wrote her thank you cards that night and put them in the mail that night. So then they would get to her like while she was in Iowa. So then they would get to the people within a reasonable amount of time, as opposed to flying back to Idaho and then waiting up extra few days. So yes, and then also be mindful of prefixes and pronouns. So if they are a doctor, reference them as such, that kind of thing. Thank you notes. There is not one singular way to do this. However, here is an example. If you do need some support on that, you could do dear first and last name or just greetings. Again, be mindful of prefixes and pronouns. So if they, if they did introduce themselves to you as Dr. Johnson, I don't know where that came from, I would address them as such. Section 1, these are, by the way, this doesn't have to be like the length of a cover letter. We just kind of broke it out into sections so you could kind of get an idea of what you could incorporate. Section 1, maybe that would just be a sentence or two thanking them, expressing your interest in the program, and maybe give them a specific interaction to jog that memory. If it's a student, you could say, thank you for having lunch with me on this day during this interview, right? Just to help them remember. Section 2 could just reiterate why you're a good candidate for the program. Maybe you could reinforce connections between yourself and the program. And then at the end, just make sure that you reaffirm your interest and gratitude. Let them know that you look forward to their correspondence. Write individualized thank you emails and notes. Don't send the same one across the board to every person. I've seen this happen before. And you never know if you're on if for example, if I'm on a committee, sometimes if a candidate sends a thank you to one person, it will be shared across the board. And I've been on committees where a candidate will send the same email to everyone, and then it doesn't feel as customized. So just make sure that you take the time to change it a little bit and make sure that it is custom to each program. We do have,
this is
oh,
a
sorry.
QR code.
Oh,
and
sorry.
We're going to ask everybody if you would fill out the survey for us so that we can make this program better, or we can add more programming. And so this is a survey where it's very brief. If you could fill that out. And then I believe the next slide is the thank you. So.
Wonderful. Well, are there any questions? I'm echoing. Are there any questions that we can answer for you?
Kel, would you mind going back to those resources really quickly?
Oh yeah, where did those go? Yeah, sorry.
There we go. These are going to be in that presentation. There's a little bit of an echo. I'm so sorry. The survey link, yes, let's see if we can put that in the chat for you all right now. Hold, please. But anyway, so while we are pulling that up, these resources are going to be available in this. Why is it not pulling up? 1 second. Anyway, these resources are in the slide deck that you all will get a copy of that you can have for later. So please use them. We have things from Career Services, such as a workshop and handout all about interviewing. What else do we have? We also have the American Association of Medical Colleges. That is a great resource for you to get, especially medical school interviewing preparation. Columbia University also has a bioethics document for pre-meds. Berkeley Free Health has a great resource. UW has a great ethics in medicine. Kobe Career Closet, Postable. Please use these. I am also right now going to put in the chat really quickly. I'm going to put in copies of this slide deck for you to have. So that's the first link that's going in right now. And then the second link, let me pull up really quickly the survey for those of you that can't use the QR code. So please, we appreciate the feedback.
And I will put the QR code back on the slides. But yeah, do we want to open it up to questions, Kels?
Yes, please, questions, lay them on us.
So a question that I have about the strengths, weaknesses type of question is what's the best way to reframe your weaknesses so that they don't come off as, I don't know, being weaknesses?
Yeah, that is a great question. Sometimes people, oh, Erin, thank you for putting the Google form in the chat. So the exit survey is now in the chat. Erin just posted it. So thank you for taking the time to fill that out. For this question, a lot of time people will say, turn your weakness into a positive. Not quite that, turn the tone into a positive. So think about, like Kelly suggested, starting out with a stronger sentence like, you know, an area of improvement for me, or an area that I've been working on this semester. So starting out the tone that way, and really thinking about this in advance. I can't speak for Kelly, but this is probably one of the most common questions I get in interview preparation, is sometimes having to brainstorm what examples you can use and what are maybe the strongest examples, because you don't want to necessarily pick a weakness that is imperative to a profession or a job, but you also want to be honest. Kelly, what other suggestions do you have?
I don't know. I think you pretty much covered it, Kelsey. Really making sure that, I guess, actually, no, I lied. I want to cover more. Okay, so I think really like the action steps are the biggest thing that you can focus on, because that's really where they're going to see what other skills you might have that I guess, quote unquote, covers that weakness. So for example, I'm going to go back to my procrastination one because it's a very impactful thing for my life. But for example, with that one, maybe because of my procrastination, I've learned a little bit more calendar and time management, you know, things like that. So covering that weakness with other skills, if that makes sense.
And the weakness doesn't have to be the thing that is your greatest weakness. Sometimes they may phrase it as your greatest weakness. However, we are multifaceted humans, right? Like there's no way that like one aspect of you can be it for your identity. So what I'm getting at is sometimes when students hear this or people hear this, they think of like, what is the worst aspect of who I am as a person? You don't have to go that far. That's why it's important to think about this in advance and think about what is something that you can talk about, that you, even if you have been addressing it, doesn't have to be your greatest weakness for it to be a strong answer. I have one student who recently was talking about how time management, they phrased it as time management is an area I've been working on. And then they talked about how the pandemic, they've had to take a lot more classes via Zoom and online, so that they've developed these skills that they are now practicing in the workplace, right? So it is still a weakness, but they're framing it more of like, here's what I'm doing to address it. You're not trying to convince them that a weakness is actually a good thing.
Okay, thank you. That
great question. Anything else? Any other questions? Erin did put that link in the chat if you need. Anything else?
I have a quick question as well. So I know that we can like schedule appointments with you guys for like interviews, and I think it's resumes. Do you guys do that for personal statements too, or?
Oh yeah, we do. Here, we've got a couple of resources for you right here. First off, you're welcome. First off in the chat, we have scheduling appointment with career services. Bada boom, bada bing, right here. Kelly, do you also want to type in your email in the chat, and I'll type in mine right here as well?
Of course.
Email us. We're pretty cool. I mean, yeah, I'm biased, but I think we're pretty cool. We're here to help with that, particularly with personal statements. So I do want to find, we do have a personal statement workshop that we did that will also be helpful for that. So hold please. And I'll put that in the chat as well. Okay,
I would also add that we, Shannon and I also read the personal statements too. So, I mean, you can use the plethora of us, but I would really defer the interview experience to Kelsey and Kelly and their office staff. They have a wonderful team over there that can help you with practicing. And also just another, you know, shameless plug for our MMI. So the multiple mini interview will be on April 5th, and you should have gotten an email from me today about the interviewee spots and the interview and the observer spots. If you are not quite ready to interview yet, but you want to see how it works, that would be a great spot to do, is be an observer. If you are going to be applying this summer, it would be ideal for you to participate as an interviewee.
And with that, we also have in the link I just put in, we have recordings of these some of these workshops. So the first one for your question with personal statements is here on this page. So this will give you this workshop we also did in collaboration with our 2 offices. So it gives a nice 20,000 foot view to get some gears turning. And then you can ask all of us for support on that.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome. What other questions you have? Any of them?
We'll stay on. Let's go ahead and turn the recording off, Shannon.